All right, so we'll get started. A few more people might come in as we go. So this lecture, which will have a little bit of guided practice as well, is on Zen and Yin Yoga. I find this is actually one of the lectures, workshops, content that I end up talking about the most, because these are two practices I really love very much. So my name is TJ. I don't know how many of you have seen me in any of the other offerings this weekend, but I teach Yin Yoga teacher trainings all over the world full time. That's what I do, Yin Yoga. I love it. And I'm also very much into Zen and Buddhism, and that's my personal primary practice. And so that's why those two things I'll be talking about. And I think about them a lot as well and how they kind of fit together. So let's jump right into it. If you have questions as I go, feel free to type them into the chat box, because I do check that kind of if there's a pause where I ask for questions, if there's any in there, I'll address them, or at the end, I leave some time for us to chat about anything. So feel free to type in anything that you want to know more about. So let's start just with why mixing these practices is even anything worth our time. And it's because there's quite a bit of overlap with the different characteristics that they have. I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with Yin Yoga. Probably by now, if you've attended a few things this weekend, even as a beginner, you probably have some idea what's going on with that. With Zen, I'll explain a little bit more, just assuming that it may be new for you. So both practices, Zen, and I'll probably refer to it interchangeably as Zen or meditation or Zazen. So Zazen is Zen meditation. It's a practice which I'll guide you through later. So Zen meditation and Yin Yoga, both practices clear the mind and or rewire the mind and body. And the way they do that is they're practices of letting go. And they let go of, on a technical level, descriptively, different things, but in the practice experientially itself, it's kind of the same thing. So what I mean by that is in Yin Yoga, you're letting go of tension in the body. It's a practice where you're just over and over again, you're in a pose, you feel some tension in whatever muscle tissue or target for the pose, and you let it go. Or maybe you're holding tension somewhere else. We all have habitual muscle tension that we hold, and you find that while you're in the pose and you let that go. And then we're kind of trained by our lifestyles or society where that tension will come back in. And then like the shoulders, for example, like you kind of find your shoulders are up and you're like, oh, there's no reason for that. Like, let me let that go. But then a few minutes later, if you checked again, it's right back there again. And so you let that go. And so you continually in a Yin Yoga practice are finding those areas of tension and just letting them go. And in doing that, you're reprogramming you can think of it either your nervous system or just your tissues, like your a software or something, like just putting new repetition. And so your tissues and your body and your nervous system are going to start, if you do it enough, its default state goes from holding that tension, here just as the example, could be anywhere though. The default is holding that tension. You do enough Yin Yoga where you've told it enough times to not hold that tension, to let it go. And then the default becomes just being at ease. I see my internet connection may kind of get stuck every now and then. It's been a little slow, so apologies. So that's kind of rewiring the tissues with Yin Yoga through the letting go over and over and over and over and over and over again. It doesn't happen within even a few practices or a dozen practices. We're talking about like weeks of practice, and your tissues will get reprogrammed to not hold tension. And then you live in that state of not holding tension until either you stop doing Yin Yoga and society reprograms us to hold the tension, or you continue practicing a little bit of yin yoga as like a maintenance practice to keep that that default untense state. So then how does Zen also kind of overlap and do this? So Zen or Zen meditation is really what I'm talking about. There's many kinds of meditation, so I can't really speak for those other kinds. Zen and Zazen is what I practice. It reprograms your mind, and it reprograms it by letting go of thoughts. And like I said, I'll guide us through a Zazen practice later, so if you're not familiar with it, you'll know how it works. But it's basically you're sitting in meditation, and anytime you get distracted by anything, and like you find in meditation, there's nothing there. It's not guided. You don't have some app like telling you like what to do or how to like monitor yourself in meditation. It's just you're sitting there, maybe counting your breath is kind of maybe the most you might be doing in Zen practice. But you're finding that you'll get distracted, maybe by a thought, maybe by a body sensation, maybe by a sound outside or something, maybe by an itch like somewhere. And it will pull your mind away from focusing on your breath or kind of just being or focusing on whatever the teacher has told you to focus on. It's usually your breath. And so you let go of that distraction. And we all have the ability to do that. When we get distracted, you don't have to keep following the narrative of that distraction and thinking about it and processing it and judging it and putting labels on it. You can let it go. Just be like, I'm not really interested in that itch I have on my neck. Where's my breath? There it is. So you let that go and come back to something else. If it's a sound outside, you let it go and you come back to something else. Maybe the sound continues outside, and so you keep getting distracted. Maybe the thought or sensation in the body is still there. Like, so you're not like getting rid of it in any particular way. But you are weakening its hold on you, on your awareness, on your mind, by letting it go over and over and over again, to the point where I like to think of it as like your mind becomes less sticky with Zen meditation, because you're doing the same thing I was talking about with yin yoga and letting go of tension in the body. With Zen meditation, you're letting go of distractions. And so if you're really good at letting go of distractions, it resets the default of your mind to not be distracted as much. And essentially, it's another way of saying to be more focused. Like, and focus is just putting your mind somewhere, and it will stay there, your mind, for as long as you want it to. If you're like a master meditator, like this isn't something that's you do in like a workshop or like even like regular practice for weeks or months. But like at a certain point, like you can place your mind somewhere and it will stay there. It won't get pulled away by other things. And it's not like a magic trick, it's just rewiring. Like if you reprogram software, you didn't do magic, you just told it what you wanted it to do, and now it does it. And so yin yoga does that for our body's nervous system holding of tension. You tell it what you want it to do, not hold tension. If you do it enough times, it gets the program and it starts doing that. With Zen, you tell it enough times, you don't want it to get pulled away by all these things going on all over the place all the time, and to just be where you've placed it, on your breath in this case. But once you've trained it on your breath, the mind is trained not to be on the breath, but to be placed where you want to place it. And you're just using the breath as kind of like a generic placeholder because it's accessible to you all the time. And then what you've done is you've created a mind that can stay where it's placed, and it's not, you can place it really well on your breath because that's what you've practiced with. But the skill of placing it and it not getting distracted is kind of the broader outcome. So that's kind of like how the two practices overlap in terms of clearing the mind or rewiring the mind and body. And clearing the mind is like not to be confused with like having no thoughts, empty your mind of thoughts, like all the more esoteric stuff you hear where it's like, oh, I can't meditate because I have thoughts. It's like, yeah, you're not trying to not have thoughts. You're going to have thoughts. And I tell people, usually I compare it to like your heart. You're never going to get your heart to stop pumping blood. It would be crazy. That's what your heart does. It pumps blood. You can, through exercise, get it to pump at different rates more efficiently. Your brain is never going to stop having thoughts. That's what it does. It generates thoughts. So you're not going to just be able to like switch that out and clear it permanently. It's always going to have kind of stuff coming up. But you can kind of get it to a point where it doesn't have it in such a rapid, chaotic way. And your mind is just able to kind of be without really getting pulled or pushed as easily as we're trained by society now with our phones and scrolling. We have very short attention spans. So this gives us kind of a broader ability to just be. All right, the next way that they overlap. It opens you to different ways of thinking and being. So this one is interesting because, again, I mentioned a couple times like society, right? Like, and I'm not like making a case against society. Like, we're humans, we live in society. But like society has different flavors of ways that it programs humans over different eras and different locations and time and on the planet. And we kind of get stuck as individuals. We think like, this is the only way. I have to be productive and I have to be busy all the time and I have to do stuff, and whatever tension I have, that's just normal. That's how it is. I guess I have to be that way. I'll go to the doctor and get like something to relax me, like, or like we'll turn to different external things or things that society typically says, well, just do it this way. When the solution is often quite a bit more simple. Like I was just talking about, just reprogramming yourself. Society inundates us with all kinds of programming. And again, it's not bad. This isn't like good or evil, like we shouldn't be programmed by society. Like that can be a whole other discussion. Like, but the fact is that like we're influenced by our surroundings. And our surroundings have certain characteristics that they inundate us with all the time with inputs. And like if we have enough of those inputs over time, as we grow, years and years and decades of being in our society, it just feels like we can't distinguish it being any other way. So the slowness that yin yoga brings about, like that inner awareness of like this just visceral experience of the body, is very different than all the outward stuff that's always telling us different things. And with meditation, it's that this sense that like the mind isn't really a thing that we need to identify with. Or even associate with. Like it's just like clouds in the sky. We don't really give a second thought to. Like they just kind of go. It's a metaphor that's used a lot. Like your thoughts are just like clouds in the sky. Whether or not you attach to them and identify with a thought that you have, or judge yourself for a thought that you have, or judge yourself for having too many thoughts, like that's all just us adding stuff on top of clouds in the sky. Like who wouldn't say like, oh, those clouds, there's too many today. Like, oh, it's not good. I mean, if you don't like rain, maybe if it's going to rain, but that's just a like opinion on what weather you like. But like you might like having like many thoughts, and that's fine. I find as an artist, I used to be an artist, and all that extra jumble of thoughts was helpful for creativity. Like there's a lot of cross connections that happen, and so like I would stumble across different things, but it was very chaotic. Like so that's why I kind of started just steering more towards yoga and meditation. I didn't want to live in that chaos that was helpful for being an artist. So through a yin yoga practice and through a meditation practice, you start to realize there's another way. There's another way of like just the feeling of urgency in the body diminishes. Like you feel like you can kind of just rest where you are. Like yin yoga practice, if you're doing it regularly, kind of changes your perception of time. Like it's just, you're comfortable being in a pose for 5 more minutes. Sitting waiting for the bus for like 10 minutes is nothing. Like it's like 2 yin poses, and your body becomes temporarily accustomed to that. It's a different way of feeling than everyone else. You'll see they're fidgeting all the time at the bus stop, like flipping through their phones and stuff, like with only like 30 seconds before the bus gets here, and they're seeing how far they can get in the newsfeed. Like, so yin yoga sets up a different way of feeling in the body, like being at ease and feeling comfortable just there, waiting through time. And meditation kind of gets the mind to feel different, like that you have a different association with thoughts. They don't feel like they are you. They're just things that are passing by, just because we have a brain. And so both yin yoga and Zen meditation, they provide different ways of thinking and being and feeling, dramatically different. The times when I've practiced the most, either of those practices, where I was practicing every day for like 30 minutes to an hour of one or the other. Usually it's like all yin yoga for several months every day, or it's like all meditation several months every day. It changes so much how I felt I was interacting with and perceiving things around me, and how those things were or weren't influencing me. The more I practiced, those were the times where I felt the least pulled or pushed by anything outside of me. And I just was whatever I felt like being at that time, like being here, being there, being still, being active. It was all my choice coming from inside me, rather than things outside making me feel awkward or uncomfortable, or having to do this or that to maintain some kind of appearance. And then I don't practice like that all the time. There are times where it dips then, and like I don't have a practice, or I have a much more diminished practice of either of those for a period of time. And I've learned to appreciate those, because then it reminds me, oh yeah, this is what it feels like when I don't practice. I feel very kind of like solid, either mentally or physically, like things can move me around more, and I don't have as much ability to just like be and not really, I don't want to, for lack of a better term, like not really care like what's going on around me. But also still be very connected to everything around me. So it's not just like a callousness or like a detached sense of ease. It's a very still connected sense of ease, but it's just not one that you feel influenced by. So next kind of way these two practices overlap is they both more Zen, but to a degree, they both provide a rich philosophical framework to explore. So I was talking about two things previous to this that were very more experiential. But when you're kind of like emptying yourself out with these practices, like disconnecting things that have tethered to you from the outside world, like that influence your thoughts or influence tension in your body, you're kind of disconnecting all these things from you when you do these practices. And then you can just stay in that and rest in that. Or you can kind of explore these philosophies that accompany these practices. So for yin yoga, it's Taoism. I'll talk about that in a second. And for Zen meditation, it's Zen or Buddhism. But Zen is a very specific, particular kind of Buddhism, almost a thing in itself, separate from that. So with Taoism, it's yin and yang, like hence the name yin yoga. And if you've ever seen the symbol, everybody's seen it. It's cliche now. It's a circle with kind of like two paisleys, like a black paisley or black curving raindrop and a white curving raindrop. And then each has like a little dot of the other in it. So that's the symbol for it. And it's just saying that everything has balance and works in kind of, it's a constantly moving balance and cycle. The image is static, but it's talking about like the seasons or day and night, or different energy being like up and ready to be active, and calm and ready to like rest. Or you can think of all kinds of different things that this could refer to, but it's talking a lot about how nature has this dynamic naturally in it. And it's, if you want to summarize it in one sense, it's about balance. And it's a vast, really interesting, but also quite simple philosophy to explore. And there's a great book that is called the Tao Te Ching, which is very simple, like kind of poetic chapters, like fits on one page, like in kind of one small chunk of text. So it's very easy to read, very poetic, but very profound. The things that it says, anyone I've told to read it, and all the trainees in my trainings have to read it, they often seem to like just feel like, yeah, this is saying something I relate to. And it's not, it feels almost like it would just be too vague or too abstract, but somehow it connects with something, because it's talking about like something very fundamental to our nature as just like living beings on Earth. And so that's a great, if you're interested in studying that philosophy, because I can't get into too much depth with it here, get the Tao Te Ching, and it's spelled with T's, Taotesching. Actually, I'm going to talk about it later in the panel talk about yin yoga resources. For Zen, the philosophy is like based on Buddhism, but also Zen is from Japan. So it's a very Japanese sensibility, which has got a lot of other philosophical things mixed into it, and pairs with some like the native religions of Japan. So it's very unique. And it's also very much about nature, but also very much about just being in the moment. And it has Zen koans. If you don't know what Zen koans are, they're like these nonsensical riddles or little stories, and there's hundreds of them, maybe thousands, that the monks would use in training like pupils, other younger monks. So they use these koans that are kind of like, they sound like something your brain should be able to solve. Like it's almost like it puts forth a riddle. The most generic one is like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? I don't even know if that's one that's really used that much, but generally when you say that, people are like, oh yeah, I've heard that. And it's kind of like, you think like, okay, I get it. I think I can work that out. Like it's like one hand clapping or like something like that. Like your brain wants to figure it out. And you work with a teacher, and the teacher asks you like, okay, what's the answer to this? You've meditated on it for like a week, and they say, what's the answer? And you give an answer, and they say like, either yes, here's the next koan, or they say, no, keep meditating on it. And sometimes students can be meditating on a single koan like their whole life. They never get to the next one. Other times they can go through them quite quickly. And what it's trying to do, the answer it's trying to elicit, is not like a math problem where it's like, once they figure it out, if you tell all the other students, they know the same answer and they can all advance. It's unique to the student, and the teacher uniquely knows the student and kind of looks for how they're answering. And so they're just these weird riddles intended to kind of give you little moments of like enlightenment, or like breaking through like kind of our generic way of thinking. So anyway, that's like just some of the things that are involved in Zen, as far as philosophy and different things. And the reason I'm saying that these things are important or integral to these practices, Zen and Yin Yoga, is when you are kind of emptying out yourself a lot and kind of like becoming just very still with as you are, then sometimes you want to fill up with something else. It's kind of like if you have an empty teacup sitting on the counter long enough, you're going to pour something in it and drink from it. So you become like more empty and kind of a sponge, like ready to soak in new things. And these practices come with stuff that are, I think, quite paradigm shifting in terms of how it makes you think about stuff. And if we have these busy minds all the time, you're not really ready or like geared up like to think about this stuff. It just doesn't make sense because it's not on the level of like, I got to pay taxes next month, or like I got to go do this thing or that thing next week, like, or tomorrow, or in the next hour or something. Like our mind's thinking like that. It doesn't have time to think about what this one hand clapping sounds like. But when you start to do these practices enough, like you start to feel this space that you have within you, and recognize that like a lot of the stuff we were just spinning in our minds and holding in our bodies, we didn't need. And now suddenly there's all this extra space, and you can fill it back up again with whatever society wants to fill you with. Society would be happy to fill you with all kinds of things. Everybody will be happy to tell you what you should be thinking about or doing. Like, I'm doing it right now, but like, don't listen to me. Like, do these practices and then see what feels right for you to fill back up with that space you've created inside you. And these practices have some like things for you to explore. If that interests you, you can explore literally anything. It gives you the space to then say, you know what, I'm really interested in quantum physics, or I'm really interested in Christianity, or I'm really interested in learning to play music. You've now got space within you to take in that information of whatever you want, and fill yourself back up. And that's why meditation, like the interesting thing is like a lot of people do meditation and it's just sharpening a tool. It's a practice of sharpening a tool, your mind. And a lot of people will take that and they're like corporate CEOs, or they're like Wall Street analysts or something, and they sharpen their mind and then they apply it to those things, which is debatable whether or not you think those are valid things that are bringing about better stuff for everyone. But if you don't want to apply it to those things, you can apply it to other things. So it's just sharpening the tool, the practices, making you ready to go after something with a more complete sponge-like, ready to soak things in version of yourself. And then you decide what you soak up. All right, next there's two more I want to talk about before we do the guided practice. And then I see some people have been writing some stuff. I'll take a look at that as well in the chat. So both of these practices are, they celebrate minimalism and getting back to like bedrock essentials. And this is a little bit of some of the stuff I've kind of touched on, like you may have come to this conclusion already, but both practices are quite simple, quite minimal. With yin yoga, it's you just go into a pose. When you feel tension in that pose, you try to let it go, and like basically just stretching. It's very simple. It's very focused on the experience of the body. It's experiential. And then Zen is the same. It's trying to get you to an experience. So you're just sitting in meditation. That's it. And there are a lot of like Zen masters who say like, don't study anything, don't do anything, just sit. Do that and you'll get enlightened. Do it enough, like just keep going, or you're enlightened already if you're sitting. Like it's very much like, this is it right now. This is all there is. And it's trying to get you back to that. Both practices are trying to bring you into the moment and bring you into like just your experience of being. And yin yoga is a bit more body-based. And Zen is a bit more awareness or mind-based, and both involve the other to some degree. But that's one reason why they pair so well, because they're both kind of like minimalist practices. You don't need a lot to do them. You don't need to be taught a lot to kind of just get the gist and then just go with it. When I teach you the Zazen practice today, you could never read another thing about Zen again, never attend another lecture. Like if you just did that, it would do so much in terms of like how it changes the way our mind works and perceives things. I'm not going to say it's for everyone or works a certain way, the same for everyone. I know what it is for me. And I know it's a very simple practice. And in all the stuff I've studied, I find I'm just trying to find things that motivate me to continue to do the practice, because that's what matters. The stuff I'm learning hasn't taught me any new ways to practice or different techniques that are special to Zen or whatever. It's all just like trying to keep myself motivated to do the practice, but the practice is all that's needed, and it's super simple. We'll see. And then finally, before I'll check if any questions have come up. Right here. It's raw. I put this in kind of a strange way of phrasing it, but I kind of liked it. Raw nature-based data without language. So again, this might be a little similar to a couple of the things I've already said. It's your body just takes in data. It takes in input from your sense organs and in your mind. And these practices are intended to bring you back to that data without language. So we can talk about this stuff a lot, and people do. There's lots of books. I'm talking about it a lot. I love talking about it. It's fun. But that's not what this is about. Like the practice itself is just about what does it feel like as you are right now. So yin yoga does that. It brings you very strongly into like the tissues, because some of these poses are quite difficult, like some of the stretch and some of the sensations, then the fascia work and the things that your body is kind of processing. It's very strong sometimes, but it's just data. It's just an experience. You can put all kinds of words on it and judgments on it. I like that sensation. I don't like this sensation. I know what this sensation is from because I had this injury. If you can have narratives and all kinds of stuff we can layer on it. It's all language, and it's all not necessary for the experience. Like, get back to the experience. That's the raw bedrock of what's happening to you right now. This is life. It's just an experience. All the language is a scaffolding applied on top of it. And it may or may not have any value in any given moment. We have to communicate with each other. We have to navigate society. But the language itself is not what's happening to you. Like, the language might be an experience too, but don't get stuck on the language. Get back to your body. That's what yin yoga is trying to do. and Zen is trying to do very similar. Like the body is there, but it's not so much trying to put the body in positions. It's trying to just have you sit with what is, and your mind just letting it do what it does, and you just observe. And so that also is just kind of the raw data of what's happening when you just sit for however length of time you're sitting for, doing Zazen, what's happening. And what's happening, and I'll say this one last thing, like what's happening on your meditation mat or what's happening on your yoga mat is not why we do these practices, in my opinion. And again, my opinion has no relevance past me unless you find it useful. These practices are helpful because of how it changes the way you perceive and interact with your life outside of it, all the people around you, all the different experiences that you have, all the different things that you interact with every day around you. So the practice on your mat, on your meditation cushion, is simply practice. It's in the name. It's just the rewiring and the kind of telling your body or your mind, this is how I want you to be. This is how I want you to be. Let go, let go, let go. So that when you're off the mat, there's a residual from that. You put in that programming time, and then you will have that sense of letting go of things that you don't need and being with your body, being with your mind as it is, taking in the perceptions of your life and being present for people in the ways that are required in the moment. Not because of something that you're telling yourself you should respond this way or that way, but because of like, what is this person who I'm interacting with right now, what kind of response do they need from me? The interesting thing I've always found is like, there's so many instances where like, I found that no response is needed from me. Sometimes people just need to be heard and listened to. And through these practices, at least for myself, I find I've become a better listener. I'm talking a lot right now, but like it's a lecture. But I find that is incredibly valuable because we all love someone. Like there's someone in our life we love, even if it's ourself and our body. Like to be able to listen to ourselves and our needs and our body is profound. To be able to listen to the loved ones around us and their needs when they need something and what they need, whether it's a response or just hearing them, is profound. So that can be quite strong motivation. All right, so before I do the guided, are there any questions? Let's see, a few things have been written up here. The title of the book, I think, yes, someone wrote it down further down. Yeah, thank you, Vicky. Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. Your son's going to live in Japan. My sister lives in Japan right now with her 3 kids and husband, and I just went in November to visit. It's an amazing country. It's like, I love it there. So wonderful. I've done a number of mindfulness courses and done meditation. How does mindfulness and meditation differ? It doesn't in a broad sense. It's the same thing. Mindfulness and meditation, if I understand your question correctly, are essentially kind of, it's interchangeable terminology. There's some people will get very specific on what they are saying when they're talking about mindfulness, and some people will be very specific with what they're saying when they're talking about meditation. And so you'll find some people may make a very clear distinction, there might be a big gap between what those two things are. Some traditions are very particular about what they're talking about when they're talking about meditation and when they're talking about mindfulness. Just keep in mind some of the terminology you're hearing. You kind of have to be open to hearing different things from different people on these topics. These terminology related to these topics. Find when I come to the mat, it's called. Yeah, every time is different with meditation. Even though the practice techniques you're applying are generally the same. Like if you're sitting to do yin yoga, you're always sitting to do yin yoga. But your experience of it may differ. Same with meditation. You may always be applying Zazen meditation, but your experience in that session may be different every single time. Some days you may love your meditation that you had, in the time you were meditating. Other times you may think like, I don't think I accomplished anything. And that's fine. That's why I said like what happens on the mat is not why we're doing it. To have a certain experience on the mat doesn't matter. It's doing that practice over and over, that repetition, that reprogramming of yourself in different ways has an effect in your life. All right, so if there's no other questions, and we can have possibly some more time for questions at the end. Everybody can find like a comfortable seated position. If for any reason seated is not going to work for you, you can lie down, like in a Shavasana position, but typically with Zazen, it's seated. And if you've never meditated before, sitting on like some cushions, like so that your hips are up a little bit higher than your knees. So it's like raising your pelvis up off the floor. Generally will make the position a bit more comfortable. It allows your spine to kind of be more upright. And I'm going to be guiding from a sitting position. But if you're not sitting, it should work just fine as well. All right, so once you're in a comfortable seated position, you can kneel, you can be sitting in a chair. Just try to keep the spine upright or be lying down. You can gently close the eyes, or sometimes people like to just leave the eyes very slightly open and just kind of blankly gaze at the floor. Begin to bring your mind to your legs and feet. Observe the sensations there and how you've placed your feet. Move your awareness to the pelvis. Observe the tilt of your pelvis. You can gently and slowly tilt the pelvis forward slightly, feeling the lower back arch a bit. Very slowly and gently begin tilting the pelvis back past the center line, slightly rounding the lower back a bit. And find a nice neutral position in between those two extremes. Getting the pelvis to be upright, comfortably positioned, feeling the spine come out of the pelvis. Begin bringing your awareness up the spine, one vertebrae at a time. Feel the spine lengthening upwards as your awareness moves up the spine until you reach the rib cage. Observe with your awareness the tilt of the rib cage. You can very slowly tilt the rib cage forward, feeling the mid-back round. Very gently and slowly tilting the rib cage back past the center line, feeling the mid-back arch slightly. And find a nice neutral middle ground between those two extremes. Balancing and stacking the rib cage above the pelvis. Continue bringing your awareness up the spine, one vertebrae at a time, lengthening the spine upwards until you reach the shoulders. Bring your awareness to the arms and how you've placed them, releasing any tension that you find in the arms and shoulders, making the arms feel as though they're just leaning against the torso, no tension at all. Continue bringing the awareness up the spine of the neck, one vertebrae at a time, lengthening upwards the neck. until you reach the skull. Observe the tilt of the skull, very gently tilting it forward, very slowly and gently tilting it back, and finding a nice neutral ground between those two extremes. Very gently tucking the chin, but not with any tension. Very gently flattening the back of the neck, but again with no tension. And imagine now that the spine continues to extend out the top of the head as if there was a string attached to the spine extending above you. Imagine you're suspended by that string, that extension of the spine. How would the spine lengthen? How would it affect the tilt of the head, ribs, and pelvis? And bringing the awareness now to your breathing. And just observe your breathing. Don't make any changes. The technique that we're going to apply is counting our breath in our mind. So we're going to count in cycles. The inhale and exhale is 1. And in your mind, you'll count the next inhale and the exhale as 2. Your next inhale and exhale is 3 cycles. And continue through 4 cycles. After the 4th cycle, the next inhale and exhale, you begin at 1 again. And each time that you get distracted by anything that's not your breath, you simply recognize that you're distracted. You let go of that distraction. You bring your awareness back to your breath, counting from 1 again. You'll get distracted maybe by thoughts or sensations in the body or outside the body. Whatever it is, if it's not your breath, let it go and come back to your breath. And we'll do about 3 minutes now, unguided, just applying that technique. You can very gently begin to open the eyes, begin to move the body and make yourselves more comfortable. So that's Zazen meditation. Um, I do that kind of guiding for it just because I find it's nice to actually get to experience it while I'm explaining it. If you go to pretty much any Zen center, that's the technique they'll teach you, but they won't teach it in a guided way, at least not the ones I've been to. They'll just explain those same points, straightening the spine, getting the pelvic tilt right, getting the ribs kind of stacked above the pelvis and the skull in a certain position, tucking the chin. All of those things they'll explain to you, and they'll explain the breathing technique and the counting of the breath. Um, that's it. That's all there is to an incredibly powerful and profound practice for kind of freeing up your mind. And I'm not saying free your mind in like some utopic kind of way, but literally just freeing your mind from getting stuck on things all the time and not being able to stay where you put it. Um, and the details of that may vary. If you go somewhere, they may say you count to 10 and then you start over at 1. I like 4 because I feel you can count sometimes without realizing that you're distracted and be like, how did I get to 20? I like 4, it just makes you pay attention more. Some places will say your inhale is 1, your exhale is 2. I like cycles because it slows you down a little bit. So inhale, exhale is 1. So there's some variance in the details, but at pretty much every Zen center I've been to, that's how they teach it. If you are interested in this, read up a little more about it, find teachers, find podcasts to listen to, because it's not a rigid thing. It's not a rigid technique in the sense that there are some teachers that will say you don't have to count, just be aware of your breath, and when you're not on it, come back to it. The counting generally helps. There have been some students I've had who have said it distracts them too much, and it's like, that's fine, you don't need the counting if you can come back and stay on your breath. But for most, it seems the counting helps anchor their mind a little bit. If you practice enough, after a while, you may just let go of the counting as well. And the idea with Zen is to kind of be in the moment and observe what is. So the breath is kind of a particular technique, but Zen will talk, in some cases, there are other practices where you have nothing, no technique, and you just sit for however long you're sitting. So I was going to do some yin yoga, but we don't have time. Now that you know the Zen technique, the Zen meditation, you can play around with pairing this with yin poses. So you can do a yin pose and then come out and do zazen, then go into another yin pose. These practices help each other very much. In a yin yoga practice and yin yoga poses before meditation will, I find, sometimes make my body much more comfortable and resilient through the practice. If you don't practice, the struggle in meditation is the fruit of the practice. It's where you get a lot of the good stuff from in learning about yourself. So see what you're resisting, and sometimes it's physical discomfort. So yeah, there's so much more to talk about this. Like, I actually, if I had more time, like, I love talking about it. But the reason this was Zen and Yin is because these two go well together. You can play around with how you mix them. Let me see if there's any questions I can just cover before I close out. Do you ever find your mind doing 2 things at once? For example, I found my counting and breathing also there. Yeah, like there's I don't, it's interesting how the mind works. There may be a sense of, like, I've read different things on, like, the brain, it's not possible to multitask. Like, it does one thing, but then it can switch to the other so quickly and back to the other. It's kind of place holding and just going back and forth. So it may be that you're just bouncing back and forth, or we all are, when it feels like multiple things are happening at once. And that's okay. Like, you're just doing the best you can to let go of whatever it is that is not your breath. So if you find you're kind of multitasking, let go of the thing that's not your breath. If your breath is part of the multitasking, let go of the thing that's not, and just stick with that. If your breath is not part of the multitasking, let both of those things go and come back to your breath. But yeah, your brain, you'll start to see your brain doing all kinds of wild things. you don't need to understand any of what your brain is doing, except to let go of whatever is not your breath and come back to it. That's what's so profoundly simple about the practice, is like whatever explanations of like is happening can just, during your practice, you don't need to think about it, because that's just more distraction. But it is interesting to think about after the practice. Yeah, it's very interesting the kind of stuff you find your mind doing. Brains are weird. Distracted by physical discomfort. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting too, the dichotomy. I would say, as far as like one simple difference with yin yoga and Zen, yin yoga is very much about comfort and listening to your body, adjusting it as you need. So you should not feel pain in yin yoga practice. With meditation, it's very punk rock and very hardcore. Deal with what happens. Provided you don't have an injury that's being aggravated, but generally in yin yoga, discomfort, or I'm sorry, in Zen meditation, discomfort, observe the part of your mind that wants you to move and get out of that, and take control of that part of your mind by letting it go as discomfort pulls you away, and come back to your breath. Zen is trying to do something very different with the mind and how it relates to the body than yin yoga is trying to do. So that's an important difference. No pain in yin yoga. Observe how your mind is processing the pain in Zen, because it can be uncomfortable to sit very still for long periods of time. Would you ever use it in poses? Yeah, you can apply that technique of letting go and coming back to your breath in poses. All right, so I think that's all the time we're going to have. The next class is going to be starting up. Thank you guys all for coming. I love so much talking about Zen and this stuff, and so I really appreciate you coming, trying it out, and I hope it does something for you. If you have questions, always feel free to reach out to me. I could talk about this stuff all night. I love Zen. All right, thank you so much.